lineup so far. We've had just a number of we've had fantastic panels, salons, individual speakers. And the thing is, there's much more to come. Like I said, this is only the 7th hour. And so what Liesl and I are going to do is talk about the exhibit. And I am going to kind of give an overview of the maps part, and then I will hand it over to Liesl to talk about the transition from maps to macroscopes. And then I'll show us a few macroscopes at the end. I know I kind of, I don't know if there's a term for it, but I did did the newest macroscopes first because I got excited. But so we'll look at some other ones though. But anyway, so I will start off. Does that sound like a good plan, Liesl? Are we in?
Sure. Yeah, I actually focused on some maps too. So let me know when you want me to jump in, and then we'll switch over. However you'd like to do it. It's fine with me.
Absolutely. Okay. So let me make sure I've got myself situated here. So we are going to be talking about the Places and Spaces exhibit, Mapping Science exhibit, which has its institutional home here at IU in the Luddy School. And this talk is called Maps and Macroscopes. And I'll share my screen here. Everybody now is seeing. There we are. Okay, this is called Maps and Macroscopes, and we've moved on to macroscopes, but we still are very much maps. Science maps are where we started off, and so I want to give them some time as well. But first, I'm going to go back to the very beginning of the exhibit. So the Places and Spaces exhibit was envisioned in 2005 by Kati Borner, who you've seen, and a group of her colleagues, two of whom, let's see, Kevin Boyack and Andrei Skupin are going to be next, actually, so you'll get to hear from them. And one of the guiding questions for these individuals was this: how can we communicate the beauty, structure, and dynamics of science to a general audience? There's all this great research out there and important advancement in scientific studies, but it's difficult to move beyond this rather partial view, right? Whether this is from disciplinary boundaries that can't be crossed, or information silos, or just the overwhelming amount of information that's out there. And so this was a guiding question. It's how can we communicate this? So an early inspiration for the group was this Earth from Above book and project that's out around that time by Jan Arthus Bertrand. And this was a collection of aerial photography of the Earth over a 10-year period. And so one of the questions that arose is, what would an aerial view of the scientific landscape look like? Right? What sort of patterns, connections, relations of proximity and distance would become clear from this perspective that would not be possible from a ground level view? So using the term scientific landscape as a tip off to where we're headed, because we're talking about thought, what goes on inside human heads in terms of geographical space. And it's something we do, for instance, when we refer to how a scientist discovered a new field, or a researcher has expanded the borders of knowledge. In each of these cases, we're using a geographic metaphor to talk about something that is conceptual and not physical. Of course, with actual geography, everything is equipped with a GPS right now. We're awash in geographical maps and aerial and satellite views of the land. But with a semantic space, you can't just take an aerial snapshot and be done with it. Like the early cartographers, and what you're seeing right now, science map makers take the best knowledge available at the time, the most accurate measurements, the most sophisticated tools to construct a view of something that at the time cannot possibly be seen. And I think it's really instructive to look at these early cartographic maps, because what's true for them is also true about today's science maps. One thing they do, of course, is to mark what is known, but just as importantly, they mark what is not known or imperfectly known. Where are there areas of discovery, right? Where are there fertile areas of potential? And they show us these, and they also show us the dangers along the way. And that's symbolized in this by this, I don't know, I think he's a rather adorable sea monster, but that's a danger. And additional points of connection that we can make between these cartographic maps and today's science maps is kind of obvious, right? And it's this: as cool as they are, right, and as amazing as they were for the time, they're imperfect because things are always getting more advanced, right? These are products of their period, and of such products of their period's limitations. So this early map of science from 2005 by Places and Spaces founding member Andrei Skypin provides a really nice segue to what the exhibit's interested in, as it's an attempt to understand how cartographic design and geographic technology can be applied to map not only geographic space, but also abstract semantic space. And what this shows is the content coverage of geography research for the 10-year period from 1993 to 2002. It was generated from more than 20,000 abstracts submitted to the annual meeting of the Association of American Geographers. And here the mountains are representing these areas of high topical focus with word stems serving as labels, right? We see community studies as most dominant in the middle of the map, with things like soil, climate, population, women, social, and health as other major areas of study. And these valleys represent regions with less topical focus. And they can be thought of as kind of collecting information sediments from the surrounding mountains. So we have, for instance, nature and management as valleys surrounded by the major mountains of water, land, development, and environment. And here also the arrangement of labeled mountains and valleys, it replicates the major global subdivisions of the geographic knowledge domain. So in the upper left-hand corner, we find topics associated with physical geography. And in the upper right corner, we find GIS, model, spatial, and data, all relating to the area known as geographic information science. Much of the rest is topics investigated by human geography, with a subdivision here in the lower right of economic geography. This map of science by Kevin Boyack, who we'll see in a moment, and Richard Clavins, uses a spherical projection, and here it's flattened using a Mercator projection, to understand scientific disciplines as topography on a globe. So this one is based on 7.2 million papers published in more than 16,000 separate journals, proceedings, and series over the 5-year period of 2001 to 2005. And then these 16,000 journals were sorted into disciplines. And the disciplines are sets of journals that cite a common literature and represented by the circles. The links represent pairs of disciplines that share a common literature. So they act as rubber bands, right? So very strong links will force the disciplines close together. And by the same tokens, disciplines that share very little in common tend to move further apart. And so what we've seen is just two very interesting maps of semantic spaces that use these geographic metaphors to sort of show how ideas are related and thoughts are related. And if it will allow me, I'm going to go on to the next. There we go. So in most of these maps, I don't know if you can see, really, there is a great deal of information packed into them. So I want to make sure that you know that if you're browsing through the maps on our website, know that they are all zoomable. And so you can appreciate the wealth of information in each of these. So do check out Zoom Our Maps online. We have a new website, which I'll be going to in just a bit. And just to show the range of what these maps cover, this one is, and Lisa will jump in if I'm doing one that you plan to talk about. So, just to show the range of what these maps cover, this one is a map of science fiction done by Ward Shelley, this fantastic New York-based artist who we'll have a recorded interview with coming up later on. Just a really, really interesting fellow. One of the things he does is to create these sort of organ-looking reference systems of various topics. He's got another one on Frank Zappa. He's done one for his own life story. This one is the history of science fiction. And here you start at these tentacles, which represent like these primal states of fear and wonder, systematized through philosophy, right? So they come codified, encountering the Enlightenment, which splits into two broad categories of like fantasy and science. So fantasy, horror, the Gothic novel kind of goes on one trajectory. And then another tentacle, we get like science adventures of Jules Verne, leading into works of Asimov and Clarke, and then into various subgenres like hard and soft science fiction, space opera, cyberpunk. An interesting feature is that it shows how separate tentacles can reunite at specific opportune moments, like where, for instance, where horror and science fiction, which are kind of apart in this map, come together in this very weird thing right here. It's called Weird Tales, this sort of interesting magazine that combined the two and brought the two close together. So if someone wants to put into the chat what a space opera is, I'm wondering that term. I think, is it like a soap opera?
Star Wars.
Star Wars? Okay, I'm getting, I didn't even have to rely on the audience. Okay, I'm hearing Star Wars, so that makes sense. Okay. So one more map that I just wanted to show you. These are seeming to take a long time to load. Sorry about that. Bear with me while we just get this. Okay, perfect. So we looked at this one a little bit earlier because the maker of this map, or one of the makers of this map, YY was in here and talked a bit about this. But if you didn't hear that, this is another very popular map that people tend to spend a lot of time looking at. And what this is just to give you a sense of the breadth of subject matter that the exhibit sort of contains and travels from everything to what we saw with this science maps and the journal citation maps, and to things like this, which is a mood analysis, or the science fiction one. This is a mood analysis using 300 million tweets represented on these density preserving cartograms. And they use the effective norms for English language word list. And so doing so, they're able to track the relative mood of people in different parts of the US at different times. So as I've told people, I always look at this and I tell people, for future reference, avoid doing business with anyone on the Northeast coast at 1 o'clock because you're not going to get very far. And then it starts to kind of swoop into Indiana at some point, and then we get that contagion of crabbiness. But so that's just to give you an idea of the types of subject matter that we deal with. So the exhibit itself, as I said, debuted in April 2005. And we've gone on to many different venues around the world, universities, libraries, science museums. Along with the physical maps, we have a digital version of the maps. You know, many universities are getting these IQ walls. or large screen learning environments. So the maps work really well on these. And so for the first decade, we concentrated on maps, and you can see some of the numbers, 100 maps in total, representing the work of 215 map makers. And so after 10 years, we felt that we had gotten pretty good at finding and presenting new science maps on an annual basis. We could have kept going on, but we felt that the decade mark was a really natural point to explore new territory. Well, I think also keeping true to the values and the goals that we've always had. Hence, we decided to move beyond the frames of the static map of science and into the world of macroscope tools for interacting with science. And I think at this point, I'll stop and hand it off to Liesl.
Thank you, Todd.
Sure.
That was great. Let's see. So I am going to try something new here. I'm going to try sharing my screen. This will just take a minute. It's good to be online. I spent most of the day without power. I don't know if you guys had trouble in the recent storms, but
Wow.
yeah, so I'm charging everything right now. It's great to have power.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of people without power. Some of the restaurants were out of power, and yeah.
It's so I apologize if we cover some of the same territory here, but from a slightly different perspective. I wanted to start talking about maps and this metaphor that the exhibit uses of looking at mapping the landscape of science as a form of mapping. And just to begin by looking at another of the early maps in our exhibit. This is one where it showed Dutch holdings from New England to Virginia in 1651. And this is kind of an interesting map because it's one of the first that shows New Amsterdam, which became New York, as you may know, on a map. So it had been founded less than 20 years before this map was created. So while early maps are necessarily incomplete, they are critical. They help us do four main things. And I think this is true of science maps as well. They navigate unfamiliar territory, or they help us navigate unfamiliar territory. They help us see the bigger picture so we can pull back and see the forest for the trees. They help us decide which route we might want to take to our destination, or help us make decisions about wayfinding. And they're tools for discovery. And, you can discover a whole world just by exploring the maps. So today I'd like to talk about maps, but instead of maps for exploring our physical world, I wanted to talk about maps, science maps, or data visualizations showing the landscape of science. And this is called the map of the internet. This was a map that was done in the style of a National Geographic map with that sort of that aesthetic, but it's a map that shows the landscape of the internet. So it's not computationally derived, but it's an interpretation of what this abstract world of the internet looks like. And then just to ground things a little bit, I'll be talking today using illustrations from Places and Spaces Mapping Science, this mapping exhibit, which does live in the physical world as well as its virtual world. It is a 20-year project, as Todd mentioned. Currently showcases the work of more than 200 map and macroscope makers. So it's really gotten to be pretty comprehensive over the years. And it's when it's in its full glory. You can see a photo of it here at the CDC in Atlanta a couple of years ago. It covers a good 2,000 square feet, and it's really fun if you ever have a chance to see the maps in person. They're really something special. Let's see. The map, as Todd, or the exhibit, as Todd mentioned, is an outgrowth of CNS, the Cyber Infrastructure for Network Science Center, which is our research center here at Indiana University, Bloomington. And CNS does works with clients closely to provide custom data and visualization software solutions. So this is all very near and dear to our heart and really relates to the things that we do on a daily basis. The exhibit is really designed to inspire cross-disciplinary discussion about how best to track and communicate human activity and scientific progress specifically on a global scale. The exhibit's been on display, as Todd mentioned, at over 400 different venues and events, both in its full form and then also in digital and poster versions as well. And I also wanted to mention that the exhibit functions very much like a juried art exhibit. And each year we work with an advisory board and to select new pieces to add to the exhibit. So there's always something new to see, and that's the exhibit continues to grow each year. And I just wanted to take a moment to thank the advisory board members and the ambassadors around the world who help us spread the word about the exhibit and are really critical to its success and add so much in terms of their intellectual contributions as well. So thinking a little bit about surveying the landscape of science, it's really in many ways analogous to surveying the physical landscape. This mapping effort in some ways is similar to the US Geological Survey, but with different subject matter. The USGS was created to inventory lands in the US that came to the US through the Mexican-American War and the Louisiana Purchase. And the folks in Washington basically didn't know what they had. So it's time to go survey, are these lands that have come under control something that, are they rich farmland? Are they easy to navigate? Are there rivers? How are we going to navigate this landscape? And what is it? Surveying what they had. So maps of science can also do those same things as well. So one of my favorite examples of how you can map ideas rather than a physical landscape is this PhD thesis map by Keith Nesbitt, who I think is going to be speaking later, right, Todd? He's on the docket for later, coming from Australia, right?
Yes.
So this is,
well, I'm sorry?
Do you know when he's speaking?
Yes, it will be 12 a.m. our time. So, yeah.
So that's a highlight you may want to think about tuning in for if you've taken a break. Anyway, this is a great example of his PhD thesis and how the ideas in that thesis interact and connect using the trope of a subway map. So instead of seeing where these trains from different lines interconnect and where you can connect trains and get from one station to another, you're looking at different ideas and how they connect. You can also map a whole discipline if you'd like. This is another favorite of mine. This is called Being a Map of Physics by Bernard Porter. And this was done in 1939. So this is not a brand new idea to map a landscape of science. This is a map of physics. What's not readily apparent from looking at this, or you may not realize with a quick look, is that this is actually the product of a lot of research, and it took over 3 years verifying and adjusting and talking with other physicists to decide exactly how to represent the landscape of physics. And then this is one I think Todd gave us a great discussion of this map. What I think is important about this map in the exhibit is that it's a great turning point where we transition from seeing maps that were drawn to maps that are generated. In other words, where we're taking electronic data and opening the door to mapping things using electronic information. So it changed the landscape dramatically when we were able to do things computationally. Maps are also important as wayfinding tools. Author, data journalist, and information designer David McCandless describes the process of creating visualizations as creating information maps. And he says, and here I'm quoting, "By visualizing information, we turn it into a landscape that you can explore with your eyes, a sort of information map. And when you're lost in information, an information map is kind of useful." And I would agree. Here's an example from the exhibit of a map that very much serves as wayfinding. And in case you want to debate that, you can look at the top and see, just like at the mall, the mall directory, it says "We are here." So it definitely is locating us in the whole tree of life here. This is a map that was developed by a team of computational biologists and bioinformatics researchers. And this map shows the relationships between in the evolutionary history of 191 species whose genomes had been fully sequenced at the time that this map was created. So it's really a map about finding our place in the universe in some respects. We can also map collaborations through co-authorships. This is a map drawn from the Scopus database of publications. And you'll note that some of the areas in this map are dark. It's important to realize that maps are only as good as the information that they're based on. So Scopus is a database that pulls primarily from English language journals. So you'll see some dark areas in the map, and in some ways that's just a representative of what's in the database, not necessarily all of science. So it's definitely important to think about what's absent and what's not in the data when you're mapping science. Another example of that is this clickstream map of science, whereas you can map citations and you can look at who cites who in papers. For example, in the map of science that Todd showed earlier, that can give you an idea of where the continents of science are and who's citing whom. But you can also, what you don't see when you cite that way, or when you create a map based on citations, is you're not seeing who is consuming science. This map is a clickstream map of science. So it captures, if you go and look at one article and you click on article A, then you go click on article B, then you go click on article C. This map is showing that kind of trajectory of where your thought process goes, or where you click next. And what's different about this type of map rather than a citation map is that it captures users. So for example, we see what professions like nurses, for example, are people who read a lot of current science information, but don't necessarily write as many publications and aren't citing. So here we see a little different balance in terms of what is being consumed as opposed to what is being written. So in recent decades, as a society, the amount of data, especially electronic data, that we've been collecting and managing and analyzing has just increased exponentially. These streams of data come from sensors, they come from cell phones, they come from social media, they come from online activity of all different kinds. And they've made the complexity and the scope of our world visible in different ways. Information visualizations are a means for helping us understand and make sense of these streams of data. I would say that commerce is one of the first areas that really took advantage of the impact and the value of the large amounts of data that have been, increasingly created because of our additional online activity. More than 10 years ago, Walmart was already at that point processing more than 1 million customer transactions every hour. So I can only imagine what the number of customer transactions in an hour would be now. But I think you've probably all experienced the pop-up ads based on your online searching that they're sometimes scarily accurate. So they're definitely still continue to use data in ways that help them meet their goals. But what's important about information maps is that they help us recognize patterns. And so patterns can help us get to meaning. Let's see. This map, I know you won't be able to read the text, it's teeny tiny up there on the screen, but you don't need to, because you can recognize the patterns, especially if I tell you that this is a map of Milan during rush hour, and it's based on cell phone tracking. So how many cell phone calls are being made in that area. And the red areas are areas where there are lots of cell phone calls happening, and the blue areas are areas where there's not a lot of cell phone activity. And so you're looking from the red is 4 p.m. and then the blue is 8 p.m. So you're watching this train station, you're watching people get off the train at the end of the day and dissipate and disappear. And then by 8 o'clock, there are not a lot of people in this area at all. So this is one way that you can really use patterns and use data in patterns. When you map it, it's really clear. You can use that information for transportation planning and urban planning. Here's another example of how our patterns map and show us patterns very clearly. This map is using Twitter and what language people are tweeting in. Each language is assigned its own color in this map. So you can really clearly see it's, it almost looks like any map of Europe in a lot of ways. You're definitely seeing that language pattern represented in data. Another critical use of maps is maps for decision making, and visualization can really help with that. This one is a great example. This map shows a wildlife sanctuary, a marine sanctuary off of Boston Harbor, and as you probably know, Boston is a huge shipping port as well. And so this black line is showing you the traffic patterns where ships would come into the harbor, and there were a lot of whale strikes happening. So boats and whales were colliding, and it was hurting the whales. And there are two different species of endangered whales in this wildlife, this marine sanctuary. So by mapping where whale sightings were happening, and then plotting the trajectory of the ships on top of that, where the shipping lane goes, it was clear that if they just put this little, instead of a straight diagonal, if they kind of went up and made a turn and went across, that they could really avoid a lot of those collisions just by going through a portion of the sanctuary where there weren't as many whales. And really it only added between 9 and 22 minutes to the travel time for those ships. So they made the change, and it really did see a great reduction in whale collisions. Let's see. So I was going to talk a little bit about macroscopes as well. We found that after 10 years, when we started to write object labels to go next to the map to hang it on the wall, we kept finding ourselves wanting to say, and for the rest of the story, or for the interactive version, go online to ... There were some really important things that were happening in terms of interactivity that we just could not capture in a static map. And so that prompted that move to macroscopes that Todd alluded to. So what are macroscopes? Macroscopes, that's our term really for interactive visualizations. They're software tools that can help people focus on patterns and data that are too large or complex to see unaided. So you need something. A microscope can let you see things really small. Macroscopes can let you see things that you couldn't otherwise see in data. It's a tool for looking at data. Oh, let's see. I'm going to skip through a couple of these. Looks like that got out of order. So macroscopes are great because they're a tool for discovery. They really allow for people to get in and touch the data themselves and explore, follow through on a hypothesis that they may have. They can test that by being able to work with the data, sort it, or look at it in different ways. It's easy to forget without interaction. We're so used to it now, but before we had interaction, we were not able to filter data based on our own interests. So just that ability to be able to filter out what you're most interested in looking at is valuable. The ability to zoom in and focus on a specific area. Maybe you want to look in more detail at a certain part of the map. That's something that comes with interactivity that we did not have the ability to do with those static maps. It also allows you to frame a story in time. So you can move through a story arc because you have that element of time and the element of motion. And also it gives us the ability to view data that reflects the current state of things. So for example, like we've taken for granted this constant updating of data and looking at what's happening now, but that's something that was not, it wasn't possible with the static maps so these are all things that seem very basic to us now, but really in the span of the last 7 years have really become the meat and potatoes of these interactive visualizations. But they continue to become more complex and change and grow. This year, we have macroscopes that invite you to add your own data and to layer it in with the data that's already existing. And we would love, as we continue to work to develop our website, to create a space on our website where you can actually play with the data, where you have a data sandbox that you can get in there and bring your own data and deepen your inquiry and experiment with new layers of analysis. So who knows where we'll be in another 10 years? I think it's really exciting to sort of see where things are headed. As we think about the macroscope phase of the exhibit, we hope that it prompts you to see data in the world or out there in the wild, and to look at it and to think about what is data. So for example, how can you capture smell as a data point that's a proxy for smell? How can you use data as a proxy to answer a question for something that's not necessarily electronic? So for example, our rhythm of food macroscope will let you see what people are searching for in Google. And so that could be a proxy for getting at a question that you may not otherwise be able to answer with data. How is it gathered? Where's the data coming from in your macroscope? In other words, like we have a macroscope this year that is, and maybe you're getting into all of this, Todd. I didn't want to step on your toes here, but the Atlas of Surveillance is crowdsourced. And so that data is coming from a variety of people and a variety of sources. So that's always, that's a new step. And how recent is the data? Is it new? Is it updating frequently? Can we use machine learning to prompt us to consider new questions by finding patterns that we might not look for otherwise? What correlations are there and what's behind those correlations? How can we use macroscopes to test our assumptions about current issues and current events? For example, if you think maybe X causes Y, but if you can get in there in the data, you can look at it and see if the data supports what you think. And how can you tell stories differently using data with all of the interactive visualizations and options that we have now? So how can you use data as a medium to tell a story? And I think with that, we're going to turn it over back to you, Todd. I think you were going to talk about some of the macroscopes from here.
Yeah, but I just wanted to make a comment about the picture that you have up. It's so nice to remember when people used to stand that close to each other and without masks. And I think what's really cool about the macroscopes, and it just doesn't, certainly COVID has changed the way that we do things. This type of scenario that's there, it can't happen, but it cannot be replaced by single online looking. I really think there's a communal learning aspect about these macroscopes. And you probably see this, you have more experience with watching people interact with these. But it can be kind of a shared learning thing, sort of like, oh, did you see this? Did you see this? And you see the space of the touchscreen is big enough so that people can sort of, they know, let's do this, let's do this. And that's just something that, we can't be replaced. So we're looking forward to getting back to that time for sure.
Yeah, I'll put in a plug here that the exhibit will be at Notre Dame University in the spring. So if you're in the area, that will be a chance to see things in person.
Yeah,
we want you to do that.
Cool. Thank you. I'm just going to see. I'll share my screen here.
Okay. Stop sharing so you can do that.
There you go. And I also too just wanted to underscore what you said about the ambassadors and just the amount of people that it takes to make this thing work. it is sort of like what we're doing today with the 24 hours. We would not be able to do this with, Kadi, me, you, Andreas, that it takes a bunch of people to do this and a bunch of people kind of pulling their weight. And I think of the ambassadors as sort of like our street team. They're the people who go out there and they look for opportunities to publicize or to, places to maybe put it in. Of course, our advisory board, they help with everything in terms of, intellectual guidance, being experts on what they do and able to give that expert eye to the submissions, the map or macroscopes now that come in. And we'll talk about that. Also plug that we are looking for macroscopes 18th, and I will say that, yeah.
Yes, we should plug that we are now accepting submissions for the next iteration of the exhibit. I'll put the link in the chat so that folks can follow up with that.
Okay, awesome. And I'll go over here to, okay. All right. So are you seeing my screen, the Places and Spaces homepage?
Yeah, Todd, we are. We see your desktop.
Perfect. So yeah, and here down at the bottom is a really handy one touch submit that will take you to this call for macroscopes that has sort of what we're looking for. Some of the parameters, there's just the nitty-gritty technical details about submitting and what to submit and how to submit, and about the review process as well. And of course, these important dates. And we're really excited. I feel like this 18th has come hot on the heels of the 17th. I feel like we've barely celebrated the 17th and we're already going into this next one, but it's fantastic. And like I said earlier about the macroscopes of the 17th, they really are ones that make a difference. And they, and I think we're going to have those again too for the next one. But what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm just going to share with you this. I'm going to take a moment just to clean up my stuff. There we go. And this is our great new website. I don't know, this is maybe 2 months old, but this is fantastic. We had the same website for a long time, and it's always been a priority to update it and add new features. And it's it's happening, and it's happened. So this is really great. If you want to go to the macroscopes, you just under exhibit to the macroscopes, and these are arranged by iterations. So the first hour we looked at these 4. So I'd like to look at these 4, the macroscopes for harnessing the power of data. I'm going to go to this one first, it's Nature 150, which we've been seeing a lot of. It's been sort of our screen for this event, but it is that cool. So we can't overuse it, I don't think. So this one, actually, I used to do a really, I don't know, I thought cool intro to this particular map, but then I had an interview with one of the architects of this map, Alex Grushenka, who does a better job of introducing it. And so I'm going to switch over here and let her do that, and it's just going to take a second while I get situated.
So the project sort of came to us it was very open-ended. The nature editing team reached out to Barabashi Lab and asked if we'd be able to make a visualization for the cover of their 150th anniversary issue. At that point, the idea of an interactive component was something everyone was interested in, but not definite. So we kind of internally started brainstorming like what possibilities to present them. And we went on their website. They have like a timeline page, this history of nature page. We made like this list of when all the editors changed, what, you know, so we could then compare it to the data and see if the editing staff like directly influenced anything about the magazine. There's a timeline already there about the history of the organization and infrastructure of the journal, but what the journal is really like a venue for the research. And there wasn't, besides like these highlighted papers that are like very famous, there were a couple mentioned, but there wasn't, you know, like a big overview of like a timeline of the work. So that, I think that's sort of what we managed to get all the publication data from them. And then we decided to try to show all of that kind of in a few different lights, like, you know, over time. You know, we had Mauro Martino come in and he made the animation for the project. So the temporal dimension is like very important to seeing how it evolved, because, but then we also had the big network of once it, you know, of present day 2019 nature and everything that came before. And you could sort of see the different disciplines and the clusters of, it was a co-citation network. So it was papers linked if they were cited by the same paper. Then, I mean, we even split it into two visualizations as well. But then we pulled out like these 10 feature papers and looked at their development over time. And the idea was just to, you know, give a detailed view of the impact, the disciplinary breakup, and watch it grow also from the beginning.
So that's just a little intro. This is a wonderful, I think all of these macroscopes are sort of time eaters. They're sort of, it's very possible to get into them and find yourself emerging very much later than you thought, because they lead to interesting finding after interesting finding. And this is one of them. I mean, you can click on any of these in here. These are all the papers, right? And so you can also see, you know, the paper zooming in, where it's at, which ones it's related to, what are they're co-cited. And, or you can just look up a paper. I'm going to put in cuttlefish because I know it's going to come up. It's my favorite science title ever, Buoyancy of the Cuttlefish. I don't know why that strikes me as just being really optimistic and cool, but it is. So that is the Nature 150. And so we can just go back to SciMaps and back again to our macroscopes. And let's take a look at this one too, the alternative data-driven country map. So this was designed by Nikita Rakodian and his team at Interacta. And here, each dot, this is kind of cool here, each dot represents a country, and they cluster together according to how similar they are to each other. And these similarities come from, let me just get this here. These similarities come from this list of 32 measurable parameters, ranging from things like population, happiness index, number of women in government, level of corruption, and others. You can click on any of these, it brings up the sidebar. And also, if you start to play with these, for instance, let's look at Russia. And you can kind of play with these to see how changing these parameters will cause them to group with other countries, say by taking away the surface area. Then Russia sort of dramatically zooms over here into this grouping. So I interviewed Nikita and asked him just about this, just some of the challenges that he had creating the alternative data-driven country map. And here's what he had to say about that.
I think the biggest challenge was actually to polish everything up to the level so it can be presented. We have worked previously with technologies like T-SNE. We did a lot of data visualization. So we knew how to build that. But we did not know how to make a project that can be shared with everyone, like a data journalism project. We almost never did that before. So that took us a while to understand how to tell the story, how to present the data, and to find the story. Because first, when we just applied the algorithm to the data, there was no story. Like, we had to go and explore and find interesting things in that data. So that was definitely a challenge. And then just, building the components so they can work for all of the edge cases. Like, okay, what if this specific subset of data has no data? Like, how could we show that? Or how to make the legend handle all different variations in the data set. That took us a while as well.
So the next one that I want to look at, because I see that we're kind of running short on time, is this one, the Watson News Explorer. This one was developed by members of the IBM Research Visual AI Lab. And this originated actually when the team was working on a way for a user to navigate through the thousands of TED Talks that existed at the time. How can you arrange these talks so that talks on similar topics will be closer together and unrelated topics will be further apart? And they wanted users to be able to navigate to clusters of interest, and sort of by serendipity, by finding a talk that they liked, they could find others that they also might be interested in. And so the team had access to the transcript of the TED Talks. And at that time, IBM had just acquired the Alchemy company, which was doing natural language processing. And they use that to extract concepts from the talks. And so based on the concepts within each individual talk, the team imagined a high dimensional space within which these talks were located, kind of computed the distances between them, and used that as the basis for laying them out in a two-dimensional space where users could navigate around them. And I'll let the lead of this project, Stephen Ross, talk a bit about that process.
That had a successful outcome, and we realized that the approach wasn't limited to just navigating talks, and could in fact be used to display and navigate any collection of documents. And about that time, Alchemy came out with a new service, and so it was natural for us to apply a similar approach there. And that was the beginning of the News Explorer. At that time, we didn't just extract and display concepts, but also entities representing the people and organizations and companies and locations that were found in those articles. And we connected them together in a network, which had the same effect of locating related items close to each other. And then we extended the visualization with a timeline and a geographic map, and loosely linked all the visualizations together so that events in one of them would affect the other ones. So you could use them to navigate the articles that had the similar locations, or we're all about similar concepts or entities and so forth. And finally, we added a homepage that gave a sense of what's going on and an overview of the news and provides a variety of entry points to dive in and start consuming information.
So there are a number of entry points here into what's going on in the news, from something like trending queries to connections here to breaking news organized topically. If this seems all too directed for your taste, you can simply chill out with this river of news and let that wash over you. So you can click on any of these and it'll take you to those stories. There's in the breaking news, they have different ones. I'm going to click on Charles Dickens, I think. Sometimes when I show this one, there's nothing but really bad news in the news, and it's really hard to find something like, but Charles Dickens is here, so we'll do that one. Did that actually get, there he is, okay. That makes sense. I was seeing George Bush as a connection. I think this makes sense, Christmas Carol Ghost. So there's a number of ways that you can interact with this network. You can do it by location. You can do it in terms of the particular here, classic authors superset series 1 Kindle edition for 49 cents. The timeline here at the bottom, and this really cool word cloud that hey, it's connected with Jar Jar Binks for some reason. So those are all ways that you can interact with these. And you can actually go to the article of origin. I won't, because it'll get me out of here, but and then the last one that I wanted to show you in just the few minutes we have left here is the United States water crisis. At Places and Spaces, we talk a lot about using data to tell a compelling story. And so we were really attracted to this piece by Andrew Levinson. This one uses a technique known as scrollytelling, which is a mashup of scrolling and storytelling. I don't usually like mashup words, but this one is actually pretty spot on. So as you scroll down, Levinson makes his case layer by layer, sort of, so, you know, what's the situation? Why are localized regional pockets of water stress popping up across the United States? Moving on down to where does fresh water come from? And what are we using that water for, and what amounts? To where are the locations of these dry spots? And notice how the data visualization approaches change to fit the set of questions that are being addressed. You know, from charts and graphs to geospatial animations to, at the end, this sort of adjustable bubble chart. And this directly involves readers playing with the data into imagining different outcomes. And this is something that he did quite deliberately. And I think that this in a sense is what Places and Spaces is about, especially now with the macroscopes, this encouragement for the reader to, or the viewer to get involved, to interact with the data, is really what we hope these macroscopes will do. Encourage and enable users to exercise a sort of data-driven imagination. And so using these macroscope tools, not just to investigate and analyze things as they are, but also as the basis for imagining how things could be different. And I think that that's a pretty powerful thing for these to do. And I'm really excited to keep sharing these with you. But we're going on to another. And so I'm just going to, just as a last plug, remind people about the 18th iteration call. Submit your work by February 15th and go to this here to find out more. And I think Kari might be at our other command center. We're closing up shop here in Luddy, and we've moved on the road.
Well done, you both. It was wonderful to listen to all of it. And I even got to watch it from time to time, even though you should never do this when you're driving. Thank you so very, very much. So Todd and Lisa, you are stellar curators. And you just really, really brought the detail, the level of detail that is behind of these maps. And also the rich data that's behind these maps to the foreground. And I very much thank you for that, because one thing is to just be taken away into these wonderlands of maps and be totally excited about how beautiful they are and how much they can guide us. But the other part is to really embrace the data and the insights and to become a little bit altered by these maps, to ask new questions and to ultimately also collect different data. I think that's part of it, is that we in many cases don't yet collect the right data to actually answer some of the questions we have. Thank you both. This was wonderful.